Hidden away along the side of the road in Whittingham, Vermont is a very strange monument. There are no signs pointing to this marker, no pinpoint on Google Maps telling you where it is, there's no parking lot, no turnout, no lights, really no spectacle of any kind. And yet, despite all that, this humble little stone is the centerpiece of one of the most bizarre conspiracies in American history. But before we get into all that, how about we just start with the inscription that's etched into the stone. It reads, Brigham Young, born on this spot, 1801, a man of much courage and superb equipment. Now, if you know who Brigham Young is, then that inscription there was probably a little surprising to read. But if you aren't familiar with Mr. Young, then please allow me to inform you on the basics using another monument in Whittingham, Vermont. This much larger stone is also meant to honor Brigham Young. So let's go ahead and read the inscription on this one. Brigham Young, church leader, colonizer, statesman. Born in town of Whittingham, Vermont, June 1st, 1801. Leader of Mormon pioneers from Nauvoo, Illinois to the Rocky Mountains, arriving in the valley of the Great Salt Lake, July 24th, 1847. So there you go. Brigham Young was a major figure in the history of the Mormon Church. And for some reason, in his hometown are two separate monuments honoring his birthplace. One is situated about a mile away from where Young was born, while the other is sitting on the exact piece of land where Brigham Young first entered our world. One overlooks a vast field with a wonderful view of the sky and mountains of rural Vermont, while the other is quite literally in someone's front yard. One was erected in 1950 with cooperation from the Mormon Church, while the other was stolen straight out of the ground back in 1999, allegedly under order of the Mormon Church headquarters in Salt Lake City. Get ready, because we have a lot to talk about. All right, so before we get too deep in all that crazy stuff, I feel like we better slow down and make sure that we're all on the same page with regard to that inscription on the roadside monument. So once again, the monument says that Brigham Young was a man of much courage and superb equipment. Now, if you still don't get what's so comical about that inscription, let me explain it to you. Mormons, back in the mid-1800s, used to practice polygamy, and Brigham Young was no exception. By the end of his life, he had married over 50 different women and fathered 50-plus children. Superb equipment indeed. Like, with all that in mind, it really sounds to me at least like this stone is making a joke about Brigham Young's fertility. And I know I can't be the only one, because take a look at this. The first time that I ever heard about this stone was from a book written in 1989 called The Roadside History of Vermont. And here is what that book had to say about the monument. In the village of his birth, Brigham Young is commemorated by a stubby granite shaft inscribed, "A man of much endurance and superb equipment. Attributes surely needed by the husband of 70 wives and the sire of 56 children." Clearly, this author in 1989 is reading the same innuendo in the stone that we're picking up on today. And they're not the only ones, not by a long shot. For another example, let's crack open this Vermont travel guide from 2006. This guide also includes a passage about the stone, and this one even gives you directions. Continue down the hill to Brown's General Store and turn right onto Stimson Hill. Look on the right-hand side of the road near the top of this hill for a small marker that proclaims this to be the homestead site of Brigham Young. Born on this spot, 1801, a man of much courage and superb equipment. And then in parentheses, it says, Brigham Young fathered 56 children by 17 of his 52 wives. Again, an obvious allusion to the suggestive nature of the inscription. And in fact, if you really want to know the truth, most of the time when this stone is brought up, it is not in a travel guide or a history book, but instead it's in something like the Encyclopedia of Sexual Trivia from 1990, or It Just Slipped Out, a bulging encyclopedia of double entendres from 2010, or The Cunning Linguist, a book of dirty fun from 2003. So as you can see, overwhelmingly, people read this monument as a dirty joke. And they also get a lot wrong about this monument. Yeah, there is a ton of misinformation surrounding this stone. Like, remember earlier when I showed you that quote from the Roadside History of Vermont? Well, you might have noticed on your own already that the passage actually misquotes the inscription. The book says, "a man of much endurance," when in reality the stone reads, "a man of much courage." And similarly, that sexual trivia book that I brought up also misquotes the inscription. The physical stone clearly says, "a man of much courage," while the book just simplifies that as, "a man of courage." But at the end of the day, those are just wording errors that don't really change the meaning of the inscription too much. So if you want to see some real mistakes, then check this out. Here is a book called I Died Laughing from 2001 that claims that the superb equipment line is from Brigham Young's tombstone, which is completely wrong. Brigham Young is absolutely not buried underneath this monument. It is a marker to his birthplace, and that is it. Somehow, though, this is a really, really common mistake. Like, here is a California newspaper from 1976 that misattributes the inscription to Brigham Young's headstone. And here is another one from 1998 that does the exact same thing. And if you want to see a really crazy example, then check out this book from 1998 that not only confuses the monument for a gravestone, but it also says that Brigham Young is buried in Surrey, England. This one is especially hilarious to me because the book still prints the part of the inscription that says Brigham Young, born on this spot, 1801. So what, he was buried in the exact same spot where he was born? Anyway though, the point here is that there is a lot of confusion surrounding this stone. So what I want to do today is try and clear a few things up. In this video, I'm going to answer 3 main questions. Number 1, where did this stone come from? Number 2, was the inscription on the stone originally meant to be a dirty joke? And number 3, why exactly did the Mormon Church allegedly steal this stone back in 1999? Yeah, don't worry, I didn't forget about that part. I am going to tell you all about the 1999 theft scandal later in the video. It's just that before we get there, we got to cover a few things first just to really put that story into context. So how about we start with question number 1. Where did this monument come from? Who built it? Who wrote that inscription? Who paid to have this strange little stone installed on the side of the road? Well, truth be told, I've kind of been burying the lead. There's something pretty important here that I haven't told you about yet. See, while the inscription on this monument is certainly a head scratcher, the real mystery here is actually the origin of the stone itself. Nobody seems to know where exactly it came from. Apparently, one day back in the early 1900s, the monument just materialized on the property of a local farmer. As the story goes, the farmer took his wife on a buggy ride one day, and then when they got back home, the monument was just there, fully installed on the edge of their property, just completely out of the blue. Some local historians actually suspect that the farmer might have been in on the plan and that he took his wife on the buggy ride intentionally so that the monument could be installed without any witnesses. But the farmer never admitted to that, and he always maintained that he had no idea who put up the marker. And that is really all that we have as far as origins go. Pretty much every single source from the last 50 plus years will tell you that exact same story. It really seems like nobody on Earth knows who installed that mysterious monument. Except for me. I know who put it up. And I know for sure, not just a guess or a theory, I am pretty well certain that I know the answer to this long-standing mystery. Want to know how I found out? Well, get ready, because we are about to take quite the detour. The secret to how I know who installed the Brigham Young birthplace monument is this antique postcard from 1916. Now, you might be thinking that I'm going to flip over this postcard and show you a picture of the Brigham Young monument. And maybe along with that picture will be a caption or something that reveals the person or persons responsible for the stone. But no, this is not a postcard of the Brigham Young birthplace monument. This is a postcard of Frog Rock in the Housatonic River near Pittsfield, Massachusetts, about 50 miles south of the Brigham Young Monument in Whittingham, Vermont. Believe it or not, this humble little frog is the reason that I know who installed the Brigham Young birthplace monument. And as you might guess, it's kind of a long story. The whole thing started a few months ago when I was flipping through a batch of postcards at an antique store in Putnam, Connecticut, when I came across this card for Frog Rock. And because I get a decent amount of video topics from old postcards, I thought I might as well buy the card and then investigate the rock later and see if it might make for a good topic. But I have to admit, at first, I didn't have very high hopes. See, there are tons and tons of named rocks scattered all across New England and really all across the world. Like most of you probably know of at least a few yourself. Like just around me, for example, there's Cradle Rock in Barre, Massachusetts, and Cobble Rock in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, and Bible Rock in Haddam, Connecticut. Like, people just love naming rocks. There's even multiple other frog rocks in New England besides this one. Like over in New Boston, New Hampshire, there's a frog rock hidden away in the trees. And in Eastford, Connecticut, there's one at a roadside rest stop. And while most of these rocks are very, very cool and very fun to visit, don't get me wrong, most of the time they don't really lend themselves all that well to a YouTube video. The story behind these stones is almost always just that somebody thought the rock looked like a frog or some other animal or object or whatever, and so they gave it a name and maybe printed some postcards, and that's sort of about it. A fun little quirk of history for sure, but not really anything that would work for a dedicated video. And so I started researching Frog Rock in the Housatonic River without a lot of expectation, and boy, did I underestimate this little fellow. Right away, I found a pretty good story. And it all starts with this man, Peter J. Tyre, aka the Sage of Frog's Landing. This is the man behind Frog Rock. Way back in 1897, Peter Tyre noticed a large boulder in the middle of the river that he thought bore a striking resemblance to a gigantic squatting frog. Strangely though, nobody else seemed to be able to see the resemblance. And so Peter hired a local painter to go down to the river and paint the rock to look just like a frog. He just wanted to prove his point and make the resemblance obvious to any passerby. And then, after that, Mr. Tyre spent the next 40 years of his life making sure that Frog Rock always had a fresh coat of paint. Sometimes just an eye on the boulder, and sometimes a full layer of green and white. He really wanted to make sure that anyone who saw the rock would recognize the amphibious resemblance. And recognize the resemblance they did, because very quickly Frog Rock kind of became a big deal. See, the boulder was actually situated very close to the train tracks that ran through Lenox, Massachusetts, which meant that every time a passenger train came through town, there was the rock in full view right outside the windows of the train. And this was not a small boulder either. Like, it's kind of hard to get a sense of scale from the postcards, but as you can see from this picture I found in an old newspaper, Frog Rock was pretty dang sizable, much taller than the average person. And so, it only made sense that word began to spread about the giant green petrified frog that you can see from the train tracks in Lenox. And before long, passenger trains were literally stopping on the tracks right next to the frog, like just making a stop, not at a station, solely to make sure that all the passengers on board could get a good look at the stone. And old Mr. Tyre must have loved this. Tyre actually lived right next to Frog Rock on the shores of the river, and so he started referring to his home as Frog's Landing, and just like that, the Sage of Frog's Landing was born. It's a pretty fun little story, right? When I first learned about this, I knew that I had to go and see the rock. And so I started trying to figure out exactly where in the river the rock is situated, and wouldn't you know it, the story of Frog Rock is not over yet, not by a long shot. See, if you take another look at that postcard I showed you, then you might notice that Frog Rock is sitting right at the base of a dam. Well, in 1989, that dam was actually scheduled to be moved by General Electric, who owned the rights to that part of the river, and the company's plan was to demolish the old dam and then build a new one a few hundred feet downstream, which unfortunately meant that the water level around Frog Rock was going to be raised, and over time, our poor little frog would be entirely submerged in the river, hidden away from the public eye for good. But that's not what happened. The old dam was destroyed and the new one was built downstream, but before any of that was done, Frog Rock was actually moved. Yeah, I don't know for sure who paid for it to be relocated, but one way or another, a local contractor was assigned the task of getting the stone frog out of the way of the rising water levels. And so, a great big crane was brought down to the riverbank, and it picked up the 60-ton frog, and then it immediately collapsed under the weight and tipped over. Nobody was hurt though, so the contractors tried again, and before long, they had that frog hopping down the river in 50-foot increments. The crane would pick up the rock and move it downstream, and then set the rock down, and then the crane itself would move downstream, and it'd pick up the rock again and move it another 50 feet, and so on and so forth, until finally Frog Rock found a new home about 400 feet away from its original location. At one point, the contractors even had to glue the rock back together because it had broken into pieces and was in danger of falling apart as the crane picked it up. So all in all, you really got to commend these guys for the effort here. Like, a lot of work went into preserving this local landmark. And so now I really wanted to get some footage of it. And so off I went to Lenox, Massachusetts. First, I went to Frog Rock's original location, which is right about here on the Housatonic River. As you can see, there's a pedestrian bridge here now and a dock for kayakers that stretches out into the river, so it's a little hard to line up exactly where the rock used to be, but I think it's right about here. Next, I of course wanted to go and visit the frog in its present location, and this is where I started to run into problems. I assume that back in 1989, the frog's new landing spot was at least somewhat accessible to the public, but nowadays it just isn't at all. Like, as you can see on Google Maps, the rock is right here, just barely visible from above. And on one side of the river is an industrial park that you can't exactly just walk right into. And then on the other side of the river are the train tracks and a guardrail on the side of a major road with a whole bunch of bushes in the way. But that wasn't going to stop me. I wanted to at least try and get a half-decent picture of present-day Frog Rock. So first, I went over to the side of the river with the industrial park, and I ended up here, stuck at a closed gate and a barbed wire fence that I didn't want to risk getting too close to. I was able to lift my camera up over my head to get sort of an okay view of Frog Rock, but definitely nothing particularly exciting. And so next I went over to the road here, and then I just kind of ran across the street and jumped over the guardrail. And hey, that's not too bad a view. There is a giant no trespassing sign right here, so I couldn't really get any closer than this, but if we zoom in, that there is Frog Rock. No mistake about it. That is pretty cool to see. At the end of the day though, at this point, sadly, I felt like Frog Rock was not gonna work out as a video topic. I just didn't think that it would be worth it to make a whole video where the payoff is a blurry picture of a rock from 200 feet away. But then, right before I put Frog Rock on the shelf, I started thinking. And I realized that maybe the story here isn't the rock itself, but instead it's the man who painted it, Peter J. Tyre. Because anyone who paints a rock for 40 years and calls himself the Sage is probably at least somewhat of an interesting character, right? And so I started researching Mr. Tyre, and by now I'm sure you can guess what happened next. Very quickly, I found this article from 1925 that explicitly states that Peter J. Tyre was the man behind the installation of the Brigham Young birthplace monument up in Whittingham, Vermont. I came across this article by complete and total accident. Like, I've talked before on this channel about sometimes my video topics sort of bleed into each other and like connect in unexpected ways, but this one was on a whole other level. Like, I've had the Brigham Young monument on my to-do list of video topics for literally years, and now by complete accident I just stumble upon the answer to the monument's biggest mystery. Like, I made a really big deal earlier about like, yeah, I'm the only one on earth who knows who put up this monument. I'm Mr. Cool Guy Researcher, as if I, with pure skill, solved the mystery. But the reality is 100% it just fell into my lap. What a pleasant surprise this was. But hey, now I can finally tell you the real story behind the Brigham Young stone. And that story is surprisingly simple for a change. In June of 1925, a very short article appeared in the local Berkshire Gleaner that just said, Peter Tyre has at his home a stone monument that he is planning to install at the birthplace of Brigham Young. And then it gives the inscription of the monument, and then a few days later, the monument was just there, up in Vermont, fully installed by Mr. Tyre personally. And here we have a very nice picture of a local Mormon woman standing right next to the stone. And that is kinda the whole story. Like, the actual stone marker itself was a rejected gravestone that a local quarry sold to Tyre at a discount. But beyond that, there's really nothing all that crazy going on here. Like, Tyre kind of just went up to Vermont and he put up his stone, and then a whole bunch of newspapers wrote about it, and a bunch of Mormons from around the country wrote him letters thanking him for installing the monument. And that was that. Like, in fact, the only real strange thing here is Tyre's motivation for putting up the marker, or rather his lack of motivation. See, Peter J. Tyre was not a Mormon. Like, he did not put up this marker because of any spiritual connection to Brigham Young. In his own words, he put it up because he had felt for years that a man who played so large a part in the history of his country was entitled to some recognition as to the place which gave him birth. As far as I can tell, That is the sole explanation that Peter Tyre ever gave for putting up the monument. He just thought that Brigham Young deserved a marker because he was an important historical figure, and that was kind of it. You know, it's pretty interesting that the real story behind the installation of the stone is so pedestrian, right? Like, this was not some super detailed plot that Tyre was trying to hide. Like, it was not a secret. The Brigham Young marker was heavily covered in the papers, and Tyre had no problem attaching his name to the story. So I guess it really just goes to show you that almost anything can become a mystery if enough people just forget what happened. Like, in one point in history, Peter J. Tyre was known for sure to be the man behind the monument, and then 100 years passed and that knowledge was just gone. And instead, we end up with a story about a farmer taking his wife on a buggy ride. Like, I still have no idea where that story came from, by the way. It's very possible that the landowner actually did go on a buggy ride or something while Tyre put up the monument, but I certainly did not find anything to substantiate that theory, and really it seems way more likely to me that the buggy story is just a legend that kind of materialized over time to fill in the gap that was left over after people forgot about Tyre. Either way though, we have our answer to the first question. Who installed the Brigham Young birthplace monument? Why, it was Peter J. Tyre, of course, the sage of Frog's Landing. So now we can move on to question number 2. Did Peter Tyre intend for this inscription to sound like a dirty joke? Is superb equipment really supposed to read like innuendo? Well, as you might guess, this question is a whole lot harder to answer. Mostly because, again, Tyre himself never gave an explanation for the inscription. He never told anybody what it was supposed to mean. And so, what we're going to have to do here is speculate a little bit. Was Peter J. Tyre the kind of guy who would put up a stone marker with a secret, dirty joke on it? Well, to help answer that question, I have prepared a few anecdotes about the sage of Frog's Landing. And what I want you to do as I go through these is ask yourself, is this the sort of character that would intentionally put up a historic monument with a provocative inscription? Ready? Let's get started. All right, anecdote number 1. One day in May of 1908, Peter Tyre piled a whole bunch of railroad ties on the train tracks that ran by his house, and then when the train stopped to avoid hitting the tires, Peter jumped on board the train and he went around to all the passengers going, "All right, this is a stick-up. Everybody on this train is going to have to buy frog legs from me, and I'm holding up the train and I'm making you all buy 1 ton of frog legs, and also I'm going to hand out framed pictures of Frog Rock. So here you go. Y'all get framed pictures of my special boulder, and y'all have to buy 1 ton of frog legs. Okay, that's it. I'll see you later." And then he jumped off the train, and that was it. I promise you, I am not leaving out any context or any important details. That is the whole story. My only guess is that this was Peter Tyre's idea of a prank. He's gonna block the train tracks and then pretend to make everybody on board buy frog legs, and then he's gonna give them all pictures of his rock that looks like a frog. And apparently all the people on the train are gonna love it, by the way. Yeah, the train passengers had a great time getting held up by the sage of Frog's Landing. So I guess more than anything, this one just goes to show you that people really loved Peter J. Tyre. Anecdote number 2. Remember how I told you earlier that Tyre lived on the shores of the Housatonic River? Well, on those shores, he also kept a massive menagerie of animals. Tyre owned tons of dogs and peacocks and foxes and raccoons, guinea pigs, hares, ducks, mice, cats, eagles, skunks, turkeys, woodchucks, like everything you can think of. And Tyre really didn't make any money from this menagerie. Like, he mostly just did it because he loved animals and he thought that it was fun to provide a home for so many different creatures. But out of all his beasts, the most famous was Teddy, a tame black bear that Tyre kept as a pet. And here is where things get real crazy. In January of 1908, all of a sudden, Peter Tyre started telling all the local newspapers that he was holding a bear hunt. Tyre was going to release Teddy into the woods, and he was inviting all the local hunters from all around Massachusetts to come down and see if they could be the ones to bag Teddy. But Tyre also had some warnings to issue. He said that Teddy was ferocious, and he warned all the hunters that they better bring some high-powered weaponry because Teddy's hide was so thick that a jab from a pitchfork just felt like a tickle to him. And also, all the parents who live in the area, they better keep their kids inside, and all the farmers better lock up their livestock because Peter J. Tyre is about to release this savage bear into the neighborhood. And things got so crazy that even the Massachusetts Humane Society got involved and told Tyre that if he went through with this hunt, then they were going to come after him legally. And Tyre replied by saying, "I'm still going to do the hunt. Too bad for you. I'm sure all the hunters will cover for me financially if I get prosecuted. Nothing you can do to stop me. I'm letting go this man-eating bear. I'll see you on the day of the hunt." And then it was revealed that the entire thing was a joke by Peter Tyre. The sage of Frog's Landing apparently just made up the whole hunt thing and then laughed from the sidelines as the gullible newspapers began to circulate the story. And the legend of some crazy guy with a savage bear in western Massachusetts just continued to spread and spread and spread. So yet again, a wild prank from old Mr. Tyre. All right, here's a fun one. Anecdote number 3. So in addition to running his animal menagerie, Peter Tyre also worked at a paper company that made use of the waters of the Housatonic River. And one time in June of 1908, a stump got stuck on the dam near Frog Rock, and Peter Tyre refused to move the stump because it's a duck nest, and a good one. Number 4, one time Peter Tyre held a banquet to determine whether duck or guinea hen is the better tasting meat. And then a few months later, he did the same thing, except for this time the dinner was to determine whether raccoon or lamb was better. But Mr. Tyre secretly pranked everyone because they all thought that they were eating raccoon, but psych, it was actually woodchuck. So what a great prank for Mr. Tyre. Everybody thinks they're eating raccoon, but it's secretly woodchuck. Got him. All right, number 5. I love this one. In July of 1909, the town of Dalton, Massachusetts held a 4th of July celebration. And during that celebration, 3 young boys got arrested because they snuck into a church and rang the church bell. And Peter J. Tyre really didn't like that. He wrote a scathing letter to the local newspapers condemning the arrest of the children. "Those boys were simply playing pranks that we have all indulged in," he said. "It is not a crime to ring a bell. They are made for that purpose, regardless of where they are hung. If our beloved country was threatened at this moment, to whom would they turn? The youths full of life and patriotism, or the frail shield composed of those minions of the law?" Incredible. All right, number 6. This one takes place on the following year's Independence Day. It is July 4th of 1910, and this time, Tyre is on the receiving end of a prank. Peter says that he was enjoying the local 4th of July parade when a young boy ran up to him, pointed in the air, and said, "Look, a balloon." So Peter looked up, and then the boy threw a bunch of confetti in Peter's face, and then Peter started coughing so much that he spat all over the dress of a nearby woman, and then the woman got all mad at him and called him a wretch and a nuisance, and wondered aloud why the police allowed drunken loafers out on the street. I'm not sure if that one actually reveals anything about Peter. I just thought it was funny. Number 7, Peter wrote into the paper in August of 1932 to say that recently he had rescued a rat from a glue trap, and then a couple days later he was sitting and reading a book, and all of a sudden 2 freshly picked violets fell out of the air and landed on his knee. And then Peter looked up, and lo and behold, there was the rat that he had saved, offering Peter a token of gratitude. And also, for whatever reason, Tyre signed off this story by saying, "Hope to die, Peter J. Tyre." Number 8, this one is a beauty. Okay, so in pretty much every picture, Peter Tyre is sporting a black derby, right? Like it's a signature derby for him. He was well known for wearing it. Until one day, when Peter was working at his office at the local paper company, a salesman came by for a meeting and then accidentally left behind a gray fedora, which Peter immediately took for himself. And he loved that fedora, and he started wearing it every day, and he was telling everyone that he was switching over for good, and this fedora was his new look, until the salesman returned and took back his fedora, and Peter was crushed. Reluctantly, he dusted off that old derby, and he put it back on. And the brim of the derby now threw a shadow of gloom across the sage's usually cheerful face. And the poor sage just seemed so down until the salesman apparently heard tell of how attached Peter had become to the fedora. So he put it in a crate, and he mailed it back to the sage. And Peter was delighted, because after all, he thought that gray fedora gave him a real go-to-hellish look. But okay, I think that's just about enough of me rambling about this guy. So I'm going to ask you again. After hearing all of that, was the Sage of Frog's Landing the kind of guy who would write a dirty joke into the inscription of a historic monument? Well, obviously, we can't say for sure, but I think that inscription sounds perfectly in character for Peter Tyre. Like, this is the same guy who pretended that he was going to release a man-eating bear into the woods, and the same guy who blocked some train tracks so he could pretend to rob the train. Like, absolutely, in my opinion, I believe that Peter was capable of doing this intentionally. 100%, it makes sense for the type of character he was. We don't know for sure, but totally it is inside the realm of probability that he meant for that inscription to be a dirty joke. And also, real quick, before we close the book on question number 2, I feel like I gotta mention something else. See, as we've been going through this video, you might have been thinking to yourself, hey, what if superb equipment only began to sound like innuendo recently? Like, what if back in 1925, that was actually a totally innocuous thing to say, and it's only our modern dirty minds that are contorting a perfectly normal phrase? Well, please allow me to squash that sentiment completely, because I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that even back 80, 90, 100 years ago, people were already reading the subtext in the Brigham Young monument. Like, check this out. Here is an article from 1925, so the same year that Peter Tyre put up his monument, and the journalist here is remarking on the inscription of the new Brigham Young stone, and this is what he's got to say about it. Mr. Tyre's description of Brigham Young as a man of much courage and superb equipment might be coupled with the further tribute, a man of great uprightness. Like, I trust that I don't need to explain that joke to you, but is that not just the greatest thing you've ever seen? Like, how much more painfully obvious could it be that the journalist here is seeing the exact same implication in Peter Tyer's stone that we're seeing? Like, clearly, obviously, the suggestive interpretation of the monument is not some modern invention. And if you need even more proof, then check out these examples. This newspaper headlined their article about the inscription with the title, "Superb is Right." And this paper called the inscription a wee bit bewildering. And this paper says, Brigham Young had superb equipment? Well, he must have, considering he had 17 wives and 47 children. Like, yeah, maybe superb equipment was supposed to be a reference to like Brigham Young's mental capacity, and it's just a colorful way to say that. But regardless, even if that's what Peter Tyer meant, from the beginning, people thought this inscription was controversial. And that is perhaps why the Mormon Church decided to allegedly steal the monument back in 1999. It is finally time for the main event. Get ready to hear one of the weirdest stories I have ever encountered on this channel. Here we go. In August of 1999, a landscaper was mowing the lawn on the property where the Brigham Young monument usually sat, and then he looked over to the edge of the land, and there was no monument. Just like that, it was gone. And to make things really weird, the monument hadn't just disappeared, it had, in fact, been replaced. In place of the stone, there was now a metal pole with a plaque on top that had a little biography of Brigham Young along with a small picture. Someone, very stealthily, had swapped out the two monuments. Luckily, though, the new plaque also contained a clue. At the very bottom, in small letters, it read, "Placed by the Church of Latter-day Saints," which means the Mormon Church, if you didn't know. Of course, many in the town of Whittingham were outraged by this development. That stone was theirs. Like, how dare someone just whisk it away in secrecy? Like, they had to do something about this. And so, a woman named Betsy McKinley from the local historical society started asking around and working with some of the local Mormons who were sympathetic to the disappearance of the stone, and before long, Betsy had a lead. She called up the Mormon Church in South Royalton, Vermont, and she got on the line with one of their employees, a man named Joe Mender, and she just straight up asked, "Did you take the stone?" And Joe said, "Yes." And then Betsy said, "Well, can we have it back?" And Joe replied, I swear to God, by saying that he would have to get permission from the Salt Lake authorities before he could give the stone back. And Salt Lake, of course, is the headquarters of the Mormon Church. So what Joe is saying here, allegedly, is that the central powers of the Mormon Church told him to go and steal a random roadside monument on the other side of the country and replace it with this new plaque. And also, Joe can't give the stone back unless he gets permission from Salt Lake. And this really set off the townsfolk. According to them, whatever the motive, the monument had been stolen. Point blank, period. How they thought this is something they could just do, we'll never know, said Betsy McKinley. And the town constable, Richard Williams, had even harsher words. He said, "It belongs to this town and has for all these years. No one has the right to take something that belongs to us, and it should be brought back. Whoever took it and the Mormon Church can be fined $5,000 and imprisoned for taking something that belongs to the town." So clearly, the town of Whittingham was not just going to let someone waltz into their town and take their monument. They were going to get their history back. And after about a week, they did. Finally, after several confusing conversations with Mormon officials, the monument was returned to the town of Whittingham and reinstalled back in its rightful place. Just look at that beautiful picture of the stone being reset. And you know, the townsfolk never got a straight answer from Salt Lake on why their monument was taken. And so, they were left to form their own conclusions. Some people in the crowd thought it was the original marker's suggestive statement that led the Mormons to dislike the monument. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.